your mind somewhere else and keep going. That little voice in your head is trying to stop you from getting to where you want to be. Be successful and keep moving forward. With your host and world-renowned strength and conditioning coach, Phil Daru.
Going live, and we're live on Instagram, and we're recording on the Daru Strong podcast. You know what it is? It's episode number 112. I got my man Jose Rojas in here. Darth Flex is in the building. We're gonna take some questions on Instagram, and then after that, we're gonna go ahead and talk a little bit about nutrition, weight cutting, strategies, all of that for combat sports for the recorded version. If you haven't followed the podcast, make sure you do so. It is on my podcast channel. Go to Daru Strong Podcast YouTube channel. It's on there, plus it's on Spotify and all other podcasting networks. Now, before we get into it, I have to shout out Vivo Barefoot. Make sure, if you haven't done so, that's the shoe that I've been rocking. I think Jose got his on too as well. All of my coaches, all of my athletes have Vivo Barefoot, so we've been rocking them for quite a while. You can use the discount code DARU15, vivobarefoot.com. Check them out, and potentially might be doing a Timberland version of the shoe, which is kind of dope, not gonna lie. But anyways, on top of that, we have Pushing Peaks, my brand new program, which is set to optimize human performance. It's increasing general fitness. I've put together this philosophy of training, this methodology of training that was primarily catered towards getting Timberland in the best peak condition he possibly can be in. So I decided to push the peaks and push the boundaries to give it to you guys so that you can get your goals accomplished as well. So check out Pushing Peaks. It is on Instagram. Check out my link in the bio. And then you can also go to darustrong.com and check it out there too as well. All right, let's get into it now. Questions. What we got? Let me go down here. Start off. You know what? First, Jose, why don't you give them a little rundown, a bio of who you are and how long we've been working together and what you're doing now, pursuing your PhD.
All right, so my name is Jose Rojas. I'm a United States Marine Corps veteran. Interestingly enough, I was actually going to just get my bachelor's degree and go back to the Marine Corps to become an officer, and then I actually met Phil, and then I completely changed my mind. And I started pursuing my master's in exercise physiology out of Nova Southeastern University. And I'm pursuing my PhD in the same field as well too, focusing on human and sports performance. I've been with Phil since 2017, so almost 7 years now, working with some of the best athletes in the world, as well as people in the military, general populations, and a lot of special populations as well too. Big focus on exercise physiology, just as a huge umbrella term for not just quality of life, but just overall human performance, whether you're an athlete or just a day-to-day guy that wants to feel better and perform better.
Nice. What made you want to pursue your PhD?
To be completely honest, so my mother's side of the family is it's not either bank owners or, they've always been rich, this and that, but there's no doctors.
Okay.
So just to rub it in their face, I want to be the only doctor in the family.
I like that, all right.
But I guess the real answer, that is the real answer.
Yeah.
But I like the field and I like research. But honestly, if it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't have pursued it. You are a big researcher. Like, you do like to perform testing. Like, you do all of our testing for us, all of our assessments from a physiological standpoint. Well, what made you want to do that and pursue, like, all right, I want to be in the lab and doing some testing for that, especially with combat sport athletes, because that's what you might mainly do right now? The biggest thing, I think, is specifically that it is combat sports athletes. And other than the UFC PI, there hasn't been a ton of research on them other than maybe judo athletes. I think NSU probably has the only flight science lab in the country if you don't count the UFC PI.
And where's this at again?
Davie, Florida, at Nova Southeastern University.
Yep.
They have a phenomenal exercise and sports science program.
Yeah, shout out to them for sure.
Yeah, and if you guys know Dr. Corey Peacock, he's actually the one who introduced me to Phil.
Yep.
A majority of their networking stuff has to do with the UFC and a lot of fighters, so it's a great place for me because it's exactly where I want to be and what I like. So just being part of that, I guess, coming up with this new research, like kind of in a relatively new field, was pretty interesting. It's a challenge, and it definitely it made me want to do a lot more because, again, it's something that's pretty new, so I'm not just doing the same thing over and over again as someone else has done before. We're kind of paving the way for performance and standpoints for combat athletes.
I have to say I'm extremely proud of him, because when he came to see me the first time we met, he came in a suit, or like, it was dressed up. He dressed nice, and we're in the middle of American Top Team, and I was like, why are you wearing that? Like, get some shorts on, let's get it going, right? But seeing the transformation, the evolution of you as a professional, and now being a professor and getting your PhD, I'm highly, highly proud of you. And obviously you don't need me to be proud, but I just want to say you're the man, and I appreciate everything you do for me. So let's get into these questions now, all right? Let me go back here. What we got? Thank you guys, I appreciate you following along. Make sure if you don't catch this, you don't catch any of the questions that we answer, you can also check it out on the recorded version on my podcast channel, Daru Strong Podcast. Make sure you go ahead and subscribe, all right? Here we go, what we got? Any questions for me or Jose when it comes down to performance training, when it comes down to nutrition, weight cutting, combat sports in general, or you just want to talk a little bit? Let's make it happen, right? When am I getting the collab with Vivo? Now the collab is already set, but we are going to do something big soon within the next couple of months, so be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, go ahead and check out, like I said, vivobarefoot.com, Daru15 to get a discount on your shoes. All right. Any other questions, guys? Let's do this. Come on. Jose is the man. Yes, Maureen, Jose is the man. 100%. Jose is the GOAT. 100%. I like it. You got a lot of love over here, man. All right. Okay, so what are the best kettlebell weights to start with? Start with something that you can move very efficiently with, right? It doesn't have to be super heavy. You want to have something that is fairly enough force that you could produce to get a stimulus, but if you're looking to improve on your movement quality, go as light as you need to maintain or at least enhance your abilities to move with the kettlebell, and then slowly progress your weight according to your abilities, right? Next question. I'm gonna go fast, rapid fire on some of these guys, so let me get some good ones here. Otherwise we're gonna keep it moving. Talk a little bit of something else. What other questions do we have? Okay, so Brutal Boswick. So Jake Boswick, what is his favorite exercise on my programming? So if you guys don't know who Jake Boswick is, he's the crazy European, English, London guy, bare knuckle fighter that I've been working with for 7 years. Tattoos on his face, so on and so forth. But one of my most explosive athletes, I could say that, right?
Yeah,
primarily.
Absolutely.
I think that he likes anything that has to do with plyometrics, anything that has to do with power and moving fast in an explosive manner. He loves the plyometrics when we get closer to a fight. So when it's more of a peaking phase, he loves that. But don't get me wrong, he does like to lift heavy, but we also make sure that we do that outside of camp because he is very strong. For a fighter, pound for pound, I think he's one of the strongest athletes that we have, along with Tyler Ray. So definitely don't need to really push a lot of weight training with him. We want to enhance his ability to produce force fast. So increasing his plyometrics or doing jumping movements or shock training or shock method training is going to be important for him, especially in bare knuckle where it is explosive and repeatable. All right, so there you go. How do you program S&C for men in their 40s? How often should they train and how? You want to take this one?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't think there's that much of a difference, really. Assuming there's no underlying conditions, you would, because the percentages and intensities are relative to that person, right? If you're going off of percentages, you're going to go off of that person's baseline data. Again, there's really no big difference on there's any underlying conditions. Maybe they have low tests, or maybe they go on TRT, but again, it's not anything that you need special considerations yet, right? Unless, again, there's any issues they got to deal with.
You said it right. It's underlying issues is what we want to focus on. And because they are maybe 40 years old, if they haven't had time inside the weight room or if they haven't had experience fighting, when you get to a certain level, if you're a fighter that has been in the game for a long time, I have fighters now that are in their upper 30s to 40s, and it does change a little bit when it comes down to frequency, volume, intensity in training too as well, when we're focusing more on recoverability, reducing the risk of non-contact injuries. So that may change based upon that from an experience level. Age range wise, it really just depends on how long they've been in the weight room. Are they beat up from the weight room? How much injuries have they accumulated over the years of training? Torn bicep, torn pec, doing dumb stuff. And so that's going to dictate what we do. But primarily it's going to come down to, like he said, is more so finding out what's the issue from a physical standpoint, right? From a structural standpoint, and improving on their functionality and then enhancing the qualities for performance alongside reducing as much risk of further injury if that happens.
Yeah, I mean, we're almost 40, not much has changed, right?
Dog, don't do that. Don't do that. Come on. I mean, a lot's changed for me. All right, next question. All right, what we got? Okay, so example of my morning breath work. Primarily, it's nothing crazy, right? I like to start off with just nasal breathing, keeping it simple. Nasal in, nasal out, so breathe in, breathe out through the nasal cavity. Enhancing like nitric oxide through that nasal cavity. Trying to bring my body to a very calm state. So box breathing is something that I'll do that's very important. And that's basically breathing at a time tempo. So you can go 3 in, 3 out, or 3 in, 3 hold, 3 out, 3 hold, and then slowly increase that over 2 to 3 to 4 minutes at a time. Usually I like to do 10 sets of those at a specific tempo and then increase the time throughout that. Usually I'll take about 15, maybe 20 minutes, but in the meantime, I'm doing something. So it's not only breath work and meditation. It starts with meditation with breath work. Then I may go for a walk, still breathing diaphragmatically, and also in through the nose, out through the nose. Anything that's going to enhance clarity, right, and functionality. Also, it allows me to calm my body down before I start the day and structure out my day with my thoughts. You got anything?
No, I mean, I follow the one that you gave me. It's pretty much the same thing, so.
Yeah. All right, hope that helps. Shout out to House Strong, by the way, Jimmy House, my man. If you haven't done so, check him out. Crazy strong kid. He's got he's got a great story too as well, so make sure you check him out. Plus the podcast we did. All right, what should be my pre-workout meal before a session? Take it away.
It's a pretty good one. So pre-workout meals have to have 2 purposes, right? One, it has to fuel your workout and it has to digest quickly. The last thing you want is to still have a bunch of food in your stomach when you're going to go train. Typically, a pre-workout meal is anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half prior to training. You want to focus on fast digesting carbohydrates, so simple carbs, fruits, white rice, fried potatoes, maybe pastas, depending on which kind you're getting. And then lean protein, which could be in the form of a protein shake or something like fish, chicken. I would avoid red meat only because it takes a little bit longer to digest, and the thermic effect of food a little bit harder, so it might make you feel fuller and hotter, which could be uncomfortable, but just focus on digestibility, right? And again, it has to fuel your training, so the most important thing is those carbohydrates. You want it to be fast digesting, simple carbs, so you can quickly help replenish glycogen as you train. So again, your fast carbs will be like your fruits, technically candy. Like you'll see a lot of us eat Sour Patch Kids, during and pre-training, but you want to focus on fast digesting carbs for glycogen replenishment pre, during, and post-training, right? But as far as a pre-workout meal, again, lean protein, could be a protein shake or some kind of animal protein, and then you want your fast digesting carbs.
Post-workout, what do you think?
Post-workout, you can go the same immediately after. I would probably increase the protein a little bit more. Most studies show that it's beneficial to consume at least 40 grams of protein. So that's typically about 2 scoops of your protein.
40 grams, that's a lot, huh?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'll easily slam 100 in one serving. But 40 grams of protein is pretty good, right? Especially if you're focusing on hypertrophy, but a little bit more lean mass, it's going to be a good dose.
And also battle tested, by the way.
Yeah, battle tested is actually pretty good because it has your electrolytes, right? From all the sweat you lose, you can lose quite a bit of sodium, quite a bit of potassium, right? So battle tested will replenish your electrolytes. It'll give you 35 grams of carbohydrates, which are all fast digesting, to get that glycogen back into your skeletal muscle and your liver for recovery. And that's really the most important thing. The biggest focus of any post-workout meal or supplementation should be recovery, right? I mean, yes, you take protein to build muscle, but really, I think the most important factor here is going to be the carbohydrates, right, and the electrolytes for recovery. Because protein, either way, takes quite a bit of time to digest anyways. So as long as you get protein throughout the day, you should be fine, but those carbs do matter in the sense of nutrient timing. So those pre, during, and post carbohydrate fueling is going to be pretty important.
And you want to minimize your fats post-training too as well, correct?
Right, yep.
And why is that?
Well, there's a couple of things you want to consider with fats, right? They're very energy dense, so you probably won't need them. You don't want your body to focus on digesting them just as much. You want to focus more on those carbohydrates. Fats are good, again, throughout the day. Typically someone like you, like me or Tyler, will consume about anywhere from 70 to 80 grams of fats in total for the day, which should be spread throughout the day. There's really no focus on whether you do pre, post, or during. I definitely wouldn't do it during or pre, because it's going to sit in your stomach, it's going to make you feel fuller, and you might feel like throwing up, right? I mean, if you want to get a good example of that, drink like 2 glasses of milk before training, and you'll feel pretty sick. So again, just focus on your carbs.
Cool. Battle tested, check it out, Fighter Supplements or fightsupplements.com. You can also get it on my website and in the link in my bio and also in the description. All right, hope that helps, man. Who else we got? Anything else, guys? Questions. Training, nutrition related, business related, marketing, branding, whatever. I just wanted to say thanks, Coach. The program has boosted my MMA performance to a different level. Well, yeah, Angel, thank you, and I appreciate that, man. Thanks for the feedback. Keep me on the loop. Keep me in the loop with all the progress that you're doing. DM me if you have any questions, all right? Thanks again. All right, what we got? What books? Oh, our man Josh, BJJ coach. BJJ coach says, what are books you're currently reading, subjects you're currently studying? Which ones are you studying? Well, you tell them what you're studying first.
Honestly, right now, anabolic steroids.
Yeah?
Yeah, that and...
Okay, let's do it.
Anabolic steroids is a huge one now. I have this huge textbook from Dr. Lewin, and then 2 other guys from Florida. And then other than that, it's a big one is sports analytics. It's a big one too, right? So you can make the connection and correlations between what the programs you're doing. And of course, it's relative to what you're doing, but just understanding how to find those correlations and relationships, whether they're negative or positive, is a pretty good way to kind of tell if your program is working. I mean, we can see it, right? We can see that they're getting stronger, they're moving better. But how can we display that? How can we make those connections? So that's a pretty important one. But the anabolic steroids one is pretty important too, because it's a pretty touchy subject. Most people don't want to talk about it. Most people kind of ignore it, especially in academia and these seminars. But I think, because there are a lot of health risks associated with taking any kind of androgens or any kind of anabolics, but I think the best thing you can do is educate yourself. Whether or not you want to take it, it's important to know, okay? Because there is a clinical need for steroids, right? People do need it clinically. Right, but there's the stigma. Oh, it's bad, or it's just for it's to give you roid rage. Which, by the way, roid rage is not a real thing. It's
personality.
Yeah, it's your personality. Steroids may enhance a personality, right? If you're a dick before steroids, you'll probably be a bigger dick after. Yeah. But if you're a nice guy, you're going to keep being a nice guy. But it's just important to know the risks associated with it, right? There's a lot of cardiovascular risks associated with it. So as long as you keep your cardio up, you take supplements that are going to help lower blood pressure, that are going to help reduce plaque buildup in the arteries, help keep your heart healthy, and lower your cholesterol. That's going to be very, very important, right? So things like fish oil, things like coenzyme Q10, red rice yeast is a pretty big one too, vitamin C, probiotics, let's say fish oils already. Flaxseed oils, if you're vegan, it's a good option too. And then your B vitamins are going to be very important too. But again, there's a lot of sports that allow anabolic steroids. If you look at things like bodybuilding and powerlifting, there's your open class and there's your natural classes. Which natural class is just really saying that, don't do it when it's time to compete, right? But as a coach who works with those kinds of athletes, it's very important to know, because you don't want to give them the wrong advice, especially when it has some pretty adverse health effects. Yeah. Right. So just knowledge is going to be very, very important here, so you can make the right decisions. And with anything like that, people are still going to do them, right? Legally or illegally. In the United States, it's illegal to purchase steroids for that kind of use. But if you ever have any issues like that, you always want to speak to an endocrinologist, speak to your primary care physician,
Cool.
And just make sure you make the best educated decision, whether or not you want to do them, and whether or not it's a clinical need or you want to do it for aesthetics or performance. Right? I mean, the biggest benefit from any kind of anabolic steroid is going to be recovery. Right? Your recovery is improved by 50%. Your muscle protein synthesis is improved by 50%. Right? So you're going to see huge gains because your recovery is so great. Right? So if you can recover faster, your workload is a lot better. If you can increase your workload, then your adaptations are better.
Makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty much in the same boat. We're looking at primarily what I'm trying to uncover and really interested in is metabolic function, hormonal deficiencies, so on and so forth. So it kind of goes hand in hand. Reading labs, understanding from a more intricate detail perspective on reading those labs and then identifying what is missing from a supplementation standpoint that we can put together in a supplement or in a nutritional guidelines. This is why we go hand in hand with that. But to enhance performance and increase longevity, help with, just feeling better, getting, more energy, feeling fueled, decreasing cortisol, things like that are something that I'm actually in the process of understanding more and more each day. But it's always a process, right? We're always trying to learn. You probably learn. Every time you learn, you're like, damn, I don't know anything. You know what I mean? So like it's a constant progressive act, right? Another thing, I'm heavy in business right now, marketing, branding. There's a couple of books. One is Traction that I've been really looking into. I finished it twice, actually. I read it twice. So I'm on that side of it because, again, I'm trying to build the gym here. I have another gym up north. And so I'm also building the online business too as well. So heavy into business, into branding, into marketing. And Josh, if you want to find out any of those, any of the other books other than Traction, let me know. I'll send them over. All right? All right, let's do the next one. Loving your content and knowledge. I'm trying to mix boxing with strength and conditioning in the same session. Should I do boxing first before weight training or vice versa? All right, so Howard, so this is a good question because I do get this a lot. So when it comes down to figuring out what is going to go first, you have to figure out what is most important and what you're lacking at the most. What is the weakest link? Do you need more boxing training because your skill set isn't up to par? If that's the case, you want to make sure that you're fresh for your boxing training, and then you can go into your strength and conditioning. Now, vice versa, if you are, highly versed in your skills, then you want to make sure that you're getting your strength and conditioning first, and then you can go into your skills training. But from a general perspective, you want to make sure that you're doing something when it comes down to boxing where it's more skill orientated, especially if that's the focus point. You want to do that first throughout the day or in the day. If you're trying to put it all together, I'm not a big fan of that. I want to make sure that we separate it as much as possible because we want to focus on each particular modality of the training process and allow it to grow together in a sense, but you don't want to mash too much, especially if you're trying to get good at each one. Do you have anything to add on that one?
No, I think the perfect example is Maureen, the way you have her run her training.
Yeah.
She likes to do her SNC on sparring days, or is it?
Yeah, so I'll have them all do mainly their hard days on their hard days, right? So I'll consolidate the stresses each day. So if you're gonna spar that day, we'll do your strength and conditioning afterwards. Or if you are very, highly skilled and sparring isn't very taxing on you because you're efficient, we can do some strength and conditioning, or at least some conditioning in the morning before they spar if they're gonna spar in the nighttime, right? And make it more fight simulated. But for the most part, yeah, we'll do it on the same day. All right, next question. Hold on. There we go. What we got, guys? What we got? Thanks for the support. I appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in here. We're going live on Instagram, and we're still recording here on the Daru Strong podcast. Let's keep it going. All right, let me see. Okay. Do you think doing sport-specific movements with banded resistance is helpful? All right. So I'll let you go first, and then I'll go on that one.
So that's a pretty good question. I think before we have to address what sport specificity means to you, I think people take that too much to heart. I don't know if you remember, we've seen a couple of guys tie bands to their legs, to their arms, and literally shadow box and move around. And maybe that'll strengthen them a little bit, but I think that causes a limitation in their movement patterns, and it's going to create negative movement patterns. So there's going to be a negative translation, right, biomechanically from that, I think, because it's going to be very limited. They're going to be limited in their movement in that certain point. I think doing banded work, maybe some light shadow boxing here and there, but as far as for sports specificity, no, I don't think so. I mean, the closest, so when I consider sports specificity, for example, let's look at the landmine. We'll go with rotational punches. We can add some bands to that, right? With Emiliano, he's a pretty good one. I always have him throw his punch on the landmine, come back and frame. It's banded, very, very easy work. It's specific in the sense that it's kind of creating a pattern of him having to frame and come back so he can defend himself, while still using the accommodating resistance. But I'm not really limiting his movement. I'm not limiting his joint actions. And I think when people use those vests that tie themselves up with the bands, I think that's going to completely change the joint actions and create negative biomechanical adaptations.
Well said, well said. I'll piggyback off of that. So when it comes down to bands and things of that nature, if you are just doing it to shadow box, if you're throwing it in that horizontal force displacement and you're trying to get some tension in your throws, I don't see it being a huge issue. Obviously things are going to happen when you try to throw dumbbells in your hands and you're throwing in different directions where force vectors are being displaced in different areas and not directed towards where your opponent's going to be, then that's an issue too as well. Plus joint pain, torque, all of that comes into play too. So we have to be mindful of that. There's a difference between simulation and directed correlation. And so when you're talking about throwing punches and kicks with load, that is, it's going to be somewhat simulated. When we talk about landmine presses and we talk about different planes of motion that is conducive to the sport, that's where we're really trying to work in weight training, especially getting closer to a fight, where sports specificity is more of a priority, but we're really just trying to find the biomechanics or the fundamental movement patterns that can correlate over into the actual demands of the competition, right? So you can still do things with a split stance, and it could be a squat, it could be a hinge, it could be some type of press variation in that particular positioning, but you cannot neglect general movements too as well. So we have to make sure that we're keeping a large amount of GPP built in throughout the year so that they can never delineate that progress and also get them ready for the sport. So yeah, that's what it is. Cool, hope that helps. Kind of went on a rant without the bands, Yo, what's up, guys? Appreciate you coming on. Okay, so we got one here. Is an athlete, let me see, hold on. Is an athlete using 3-day condensed conjugate? Is there any conditioning or mobility that they can or should do in their days when they aren't training or strength training? If so, what do you recommend? All right. If an athlete is using 3-day condensed conjugate, is there any conditioning or mobility? Yeah. So if they're doing 3-day a week, usually, depending on the athlete, depending on the sport, if it's boxing, MMA, it's also going to dictate based upon their limitations from a physiological standpoint. And that's why we use something like a Moxy or a NIRS device. And we're also going to be working with the NOx device, which is basically going to measure out, active NO, active nitric oxide. And so for that, I'm going to basically cater that towards their limitations. So that's going to dictate what they do outside of the actual strength training. While they're strength training though, however, we're going to stick with the particular time domains, or at least the stimulus that they're getting in weight training. We're going to maintain that from a physiological standpoint in their energy system training. So if they're going to do strength training that day, we'll do something like lactic capacity or repeat sprint intervals, something that is fast twitch and repeatable with an incomplete rest, right? That's going to follow the strength training. Now, on their off days of their strength training, they may do some type of low intensity training, which is going to be either maffetone running, any type of aerobic capacity where they're not getting into lactic zones and they're really pushing cardiac output. They're trying to get more mitochondrial density. They're trying to improve on their lung capacity, their ability to breathe and let off CO2. That's going to give us a base of conditioning that's going to carry over into those higher demands when you're talking about alactic or whatever you want to call it, utilization of oxygen training. And then we let the skills training be more of that lactic dominant type of energy system training, because they're going to do that regardless. If an athlete, though, however, doesn't get that particular stimuli inside of a skills training, we will do that in a controlled environment out here to plug the gaps on what they don't get inside of their skills training. They may have missed a practice, or they may have gotten injured and they can't do particular movements inside of wrestling. So then we take it back to a controlled environment and still get the adaptations of that lactic capacity, which what they would do inside of a wrestling room, but we do it in a safer environment and more controlled, obviously. Anything to add?
No, that's pretty good. I agree with all that.
Cool. All right, hope that helps. And then also the mobility. So the mobility is omnipresent, right? So mobility training is increasing the capacity, right? Increasing the capacity of each joint capsule, improving on functionality, improving on movement control, controlling and ranges. You got to think about mobility as flexibility plus strength. And for that, we're going to strengthen up the end ranges of each joint capsule, allowing them to not only get isolated movement quality, but also be able to integrate that into a dynamic fashion down the line. So with mobility, you're going to do that before you start your training, whether it be weight training or skills training, and then you're going to do some mobility that is directed, that is going to cause a stimulus, which is more higher intensity on the days that you're not doing your weight training. Because let's face it, if you're really doing mobility training, it's another form of intensity training, right? If you do it the right way. I did mobility yesterday, and you can see it on Instagram. Like, I'm sore, right? Because I'm in the end ranges and I'm isometrically tensioning out my muscle to gain more range, right?
Yeah, no, I remember when I first met you, I jumped into one of your mobility sessions on a Saturday. And the next day I could barely walk.
Yeah, man.
And it was very simple. It was just all like slow eccentrics,
That's all it
slow
is.
iso. I'm like, wow, it's crazy.
And you put yourself in positions that you're not accustomed to being in, right? So like we get into new ranges, we try to gain that flexibility and that range of motion, and then from there, I'll contract those muscles to activate mechanoreceptors and get more motor unit recruitment in those end ranges or in those base positions. And then you can freely move into it now because the body feels it's comfortable and it has the strength there. So it's not tensed up. It's not, protecting yourself from any added injury because it knows it's strong in those ranges. All right, next one. What we got here? Hold on. I appreciate it, Josh. Thank you. Hope you enjoy it, man. Tell them about the taste, though. It tastes great. It tastes great, and it works, man. Nah, thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Let me see. What or if to supplement young athletes, 12 to 16 years old? So I guess supplements for young athletes.
Protein and creatine, the biggest thing. And protein, very safe. There's no negative effects from protein. Not going to bother the kidneys, even if you take high amounts of protein. Same thing with creatine. Creatine is not only going to help them with their performance, but it's going to help protect their brain. And as a young individual who's still developing, that's going to be very important for cognitive function. But the biggest benefit from creatine is energy production or energy resynthesis, right? Because creatine has quite a bit of phosphorus, and it'll give you more phosphorus to turn ADP. You rephosphorylate that into ATP. So more ATP means more energy means a better workload. So again, if you're looking at youth athletes, I think the staple is going to be something like creatine and protein for sure. A majority of us don't eat enough protein, right? So we're going to have to supplement, only because it might be uncomfortable to take all the protein we need from food. And then after that, you can consider something like a multivitamin, right? Maybe like an athletic green supplement or anything, but aside from protein and creatine, I really do recommend some kind of post-workout, especially for young athletes, like football athletes who are playing out in the sun quite a bit, especially in Florida. You're going to sweat quite a bit. So again, going back to something like battle test, it would be pretty beneficial because again, you get those electrolytes and you get those carbohydrates in there. It's pretty ideal for replenishment, right? And rehydration isn't just drinking water. You have to put some of that sugar and some of those electrolytes back into your body. Otherwise, if you just drink water and you keep sweating and flushing out those electrolytes, you can get a condition called hyponatremia, which is a deficiency of sodium, which in extreme cases can actually be fatal because if you have no electrolytes to have muscular contractions, which the heart is a muscle, if the heart doesn't contract, right, we die. So again, creatine, protein, and then I would highly recommend some kind of post workout supplement like our battle-tested supplement.
Yeah, I mean, in creatine, you're looking at cognitive function,
Yeah.
right? I guess a decrease in the onset of traumatic brain injury.
Yeah, correct.
Right, so there's a lot there with creatine too. How many studies are out? There's like thousands.
It's actually the most studied supplement to date.
Absolutely. Do you think creatine monohydrate, or it doesn't matter?
Truly, it doesn't matter, but I think creatine monohydrate is the most readily and bioavailable one out there, and almost all the studies are done on monohydrate. Surprisingly enough, you'll find a lot of monohydrates here in the U.S. When I go outside of the U.S., I see a lot of like hydrochloride, but honestly, creatine is creatine.
Gotcha.
It still has that phosphorus, it still has that creatine.
Okay, so we got creatine and protein, guys. All right, next question. Let me see what we got here. Any other questions for us? Here we go. Okay, is it worth going after a CSCS certification if your goal is to be a strength coach and help people online, or can you go with something like an ISSA or NASM?
So no, if you're gonna work just online and privately, really no, you don't. You just need to educate yourself. A lot of this information is out there for free.
Yeah.
Now, if you wanna work for a sports team, if you're gonna work for a university or even a high school or a private team, you're gonna need a CSCS. CSCS is the only recognized strength and conditioning certification out there. It requires you to have a 4-year degree, and I think by 2025, now you're going to have a exercise and sports science or related degree to be able to get there. Right now, as long as you have a 4-year degree, you can still get it. But the CSCS, I mean, it's good. It has a lot of benefits. Their networking is phenomenal. But again, if you're working privately, if you're working for yourself or online, you won't really need it. Just educate yourself, understand the methods.
Yeah. I mean, he's hit that spot on. So like, I have a NASM degree. I have a NASM certification. I have an ISSA certification. I have an ACE certification back in the day. Remember that one? That was like my first one. CSCS, the only reason why I didn't, because at the end of the day, I don't need to do that to get, I'm not going into the collegiate setting. I'm not going into professional setting in that way. I'm in the private sector. So if you are going to do that, especially online, you do want to be, competent. So make sure you're reading, make sure you're getting with a mentor that can teach you the ins and outs if you haven't already done so. I've been in this industry for 15 years. I work with well over 200 professional athletes. Jose has almost the same amount of time in it, and also getting his PhD in it. So, we put in our time, but I can honestly say the most experience, or the best thing that we've been able to do, is get experience on the floor. So make sure that you're actually on the floor coaching as well, or if you're doing online, make sure you're working with some people that that trust you and you're doing the right thing by them. All right, next question. Let me see what we got. Questions, guys. Here we go. How do you mix boxing training with tactical training for firefighters? Oh, this is a good one, I guess. This is different. You got a whole lot going on over here. Boxing training primarily is going to be a conditioning tool for you, right? It's going to be a power endurance tool for you. So if you want to do pad work or bag work or spar even, you just put that into a conditioning type of session, right? So instead of having to go and run or go on a bike or a stair stepper or whatever, you can use boxing as your conditioning. It doesn't have to be directed, because really when it comes down to tactical, you have to be ready at all times for anything, any situation, but you should have a solid aerobic system, because that's going to enhance everything that you're doing, and it's going to allow you to bring down cortisol because you know how to breathe, you have great blood flow, and it's going to give you that, like I said, that baseline of capacity throughout any type of situation. So improving on your aerobic capacity with boxing training by doing stuff that is very somewhat low intense, so you can hit the bag, hit pads, but then you're also going to have to take it high level, and where you go from a high-low approach, and you would do more high intensity intervals on the bag or on pads. Now, if you're with a coach, you got to go with their pace. So, especially if they're a high-level coach, they can pace you themselves, or you can set your own pace. This has to do with like technique and how well you're efficient on the pads and how well you're throwing your punches. But for the most part, when you're with a coach or you're sparring, just know that's going to be highly lactic, and you're going to be dipping into red zones, because one, if you're not a boxer, you're probably not as efficient in there, and two, you're just going to be putting out max effort, and again, let's face it, anxiety is going to be high, so the heart rate's going to go up, right? So you have to take that into effect. So when you talk about putting it into place, make sure you're going to go in there. If you're going to do boxing, take 1 day or 2 days out the week just to hit the bag. If you're going to do pad work, make it light. Make sure you monitor your heart rate, keep it in those quality aerobic zones. And then 1 or 2 days, you can push the limits of that red zone, or at least in that lactic balance point where you're working in 70 to 80% of your max heart rate. Good?
Yeah, pretty
good. Next up, what we got? What would be a proper way to approach a diet for an MMA fighter, Angel?
That's a really good question, but also like a very, I guess, vague question.
Yeah.
You have to understand for a couple of things. You want to get some body composition data, right? So you can properly dose these macronutrients and calories. You have to know his training schedule, okay? So you can understand what the metabolic demands are of what he does. And you want to consider, okay, does he need to lose body fat? Do we want to just maintain, right? And that's really the two biggest things. So when it comes to dieting for an MMA fighter, they're going to have to eat quite a bit. The last thing you want to do is not feed these guys or not have them eat enough, because then their performance will absolutely suffer. But if they need to lose body fat, maybe you want to address that early on off camp or the beginning of camp, right? Because once it comes time to cut weight, we're not cutting fat. It's going to be physiologically impossible to cut fat. We're just going to cut water. So address any fat loss early on. If you want to just maintain, you want to look at their basal metabolic rate, and then kind of just do the calculations on what their activity is and add it onto that. A lot of these guys should be eating well over 2,500 calories, right?
Let me ask you a question. When you're looking at a diet plan and you're going, all right, what's my thermic effect of food? What's my NEAT? All of that. And then you're looking at, like, obviously, like, their overall training intensities.
Yep.
How are you calculating that, and how are you putting that into play with their overall calorie consumption?
So with those intensities, and it's a formula that I have on my Excel sheet. I actually learned it quite a while ago with Eric. He designed a pretty good spreadsheet that has the formulas in with a couple of constant factors, and then you just add the intensities on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the highest. So we have our basal metabolic rate. You put the formulas in, and they're different for men and women, right? Obviously for men it'll be a little bit higher, but the formula is going to calculate what their output is for the training, and then it just adds it on top of the calories for that day. So I think let's look at a very simple way to do it if you don't have a formula, if you don't have some kind of spreadsheet. So something like this for a polar monitor, it'll tell you or give you a rough estimate of what you burned for that session. Now, if your goal is to just maintain, let's say your basal metabolic rate, just to sit around and stay alive is 2,000 calories. And your training sessions throughout the day, according to whatever monitor you have, tells you burn 800 calories a day. So if our goal is to just maintain, we want to add 800 calories, or maybe a little bit more, right, on top of that basal metabolic rate. Now, if our goal is to decrease body fat, right, then we want to be at a deficit. So let's say our basal metabolic rate is 2,500, and we burn 500 calories a day in training. We just won't replenish those calories. We'll maintain our calories at 2,000, and then we'll be at that 500 a day deficit, which should translate, hopefully, right, to a pound of fat loss a week.
I mean, it comes down to basic math in all actuality. So let's say, what wearables are you going to be implementing into seeing this? So
again, if I don't have a spreadsheet that I can use, I like any kind of chest strap. Polar or Garmin are pretty good. I haven't worked too much with Whoop, but I would imagine it's a little bit similar. However, I will say this, chest straps are a lot more accurate than any kind of wrist strap. Polar does make a strap you can wear on your arm or your leg, which works pretty well too. These just have a little bit too much disconnect, it seems. Right? But it's still a good standard. You can take the data and kind of work off of it. Even if it's not as accurate, you kind of still see progressions or regressions in your progress.
I love my Garmin, man. Garmin's good.
Yeah, these are pretty great tools, and very easy to use, and they connect to most machines. But going to diets, I think the most important thing to consider outside of calories is protein intake. A lot of these guys do not eat enough protein, and carbohydrates too. A lot of these guys are afraid of eating carbs. They're like, oh, I'm going to gain weight and this and that. But you need carbs to perform. That's our energy. Protein's not our energy. If we're using protein as energy, then we're in trouble, right? Our body's failing. We're going into starvation mode. Should be carbohydrates. But with protein, we're going to be looking for these kinds of athletes anywhere from I would say low end, at least 2 grams per kilogram of body weight, up to 3 grams of protein per kilograms of body weight. Now that does seem like a lot.
Yeah.
For someone like you, for example, you're roughly, 100 kilograms?
Yeah.
Right, so you gotta think that's, if you go on the high end, that's 300 grams of protein a day for you. And food alone, that's tough, right? That's why, I can't even calculate that. It's gotta be at least 10, 20 chicken breasts. So you do have to supplement, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
With carbohydrates,
I definitely ain't getting that.
yeah, no, a lot of people are not. It's crazy how much people are not getting enough protein in their diet. With carbohydrates, the most important thing is timing, right? We talked about that pre and post dosing of carbs.
Because it's a fuel source primarily.
Exactly, yeah. It breaks down into glycogen, right? We store 80% of glycogen in our muscles. Then we have 20% divided between our liver and then our blood as glucose. But the most important thing is that stores it in our skeletal muscles. So that pre and post is very important. And on a daily intake, should be anywhere from 1.5 to 3 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight. If you're an elite athlete like a super marathoner, you'll probably be as high as 6 to 8.
Wow.
But most of us aren't going to be there, right?
Yeah, that's a lot.
If it were for you, that'd be like 800 grams of carbohydrates. That's like...
I was eating a lot when I was doing the triathlon.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even then you were still, dropping weight. You're dropping mass.
Yeah.
So...
No, sure.
There's things you definitely want to consider. If the point is to drop a little bit of weight but maintain skeletal muscle, definitely want to make sure protein is up high. Maybe supplement with something like HMB so you can preserve muscle. Because when we're trying to lose weight, it's unavoidable. We're going to lose muscle, right? But if we can improve our muscle protein synthesis, then we can reduce the amount of lean muscle mass loss during weight loss. For sure. Which I think is the most beneficial thing, especially for combat athletes.
Yeah, I love it.
Right?
HMB, you've done some research on that, right?
Yeah.
How is that super beneficial? Like, I know that we've been supplementing with a lot of the fighters too as well, but what is it exactly and how can it benefit overall? Okay,
so HMB is a metabolite of the essential amino acid leucine, right, which is one of the amino acids in BCAAs.
One of the main ones.
Yeah, because BCAAs is just leucine, isoleucine, and valine. Leucine being the most important one.
It stimulates protein synthesis a lot more, right?
Correct, right? And that's why when we look at something like plant-based proteins, you want to be sure that you're getting a fortified one because leucine is highest in milk-based proteins, so whey and casein. It's the lowest in any plant-based protein, but most proteins are fortified. So if you are plant-based and you want to find a good quality protein, make sure your protein is fortified with at least 3 grams of leucine. Now with HMB, which is beta-hydroxy beta-methylbutyrate, it's a metabolite of leucine, and that's one that's directly responsible for muscle protein synthesis. So we can dose those at 6 grams a day, which you can just take pills, right? I've seen some go up to 9, but I think 6 is just enough, and that's going to help improve muscle protein synthesis. We did a study on a female volleyball team, and they increased it was 8 weeks, they saw a 13% increase in lean muscle mass. 13% is not a huge number, but for them it is pretty significant, right? And just simply by supplementing with HMB. Now, I like it a lot because when it comes to weight cuts, we have to, in some cases, have some extreme caloric restrictions, start to, lower some of our macronutrients. The last thing we want to do is lose all of those muscular gains we got during camp. So it seems that supplementing with HMB is going to help you preserve some of that lean muscle mass while you're trying to reduce body fat or anything else.
I like it. Yeah, we'll have to get on that. So that is very important for fighters too as well.
Absolutely.
Right. All right. Next up, we'll keep it going. What else we got, guys? We got about, how many more minutes we got, Jared?
You're at 51 minutes.
All right, yeah, we're gonna go for 9 more minutes, guys, 9 more minutes. When it comes to VBT or velocity-based training, do you drop the weights or go into auto-regulation mode when it comes to VBT? So like, depends, right? Depends on what we're trying to accomplish. I'm not understanding that question, but for the most part, when you're looking at velocities, we're trying to figure out what is the stimulus that we're trying to acquire, whether it be speed, strength speed, absolute strength. Like we're looking at velocities on the bar or whatever movement we're trying to do that is going to directly correlate to the stimulus that we're trying to acquire, right? So if it's 0.8, 1.0 meters per second, primarily for me, you're looking at speed strength or explosive power in that range. Mainly speed strength, and then once it gets faster in like the 1.5, 2.0 range, now you're looking into pure explosive power or power movements. when you're talking about absolute strength or even just strength speed, you're gonna go a little bit lower, so it's 0.5 meters per second and lower, and that's gonna increase your maximal strength or your strength endurance. And what I mean by strength endurance is your ability to be strong for an extended amount of time, but not too far to where you lose intensity. So the intensity zones for strength endurance is roughly around 90%. Don't get it confused with muscle endurance, which is more like 40, 50, 60%, where you're trying to gain more of a conditioning based approach as opposed to more strength and being able to produce that force for an extended volume. That make sense?
Yep.
Cool. All right, perfect. I'm glad you guys got the training programs. Any other questions so far? Otherwise, we're gonna close it out. Okay, we got one right here. What should be sequence of strength, power, endurance, and strength, endurance, balance, and stability if you do them in the same training session? Okay, so if you're gonna work vertical integration, if you're gonna work multiple things at once and try to improve, we have to first find out what's the focus point. It's all good if you wanna run conjugate, but the problem with that is that you have to find a focus based. So if you're running conjugate and you're bringing up all these things, we have to turn up the dials on one particular aspect of the training. Doesn't mean that you can't turn everything on, but we're gonna turn up something that we're trying to focus. So if you're talking about a sport like MMA, within the first 2 to 3 weeks of camp, we're trying to improve on maximal strength. So now we're still hitting our power work, we're still doing our low-level plyometrics, and we're still working some conditioning, but we're focusing on gaining max force production. And then so on and so forth as you go down the line. So if I were to plan out a particular training day, you can go from your basic mobility, dynamic warm-up, and then you're gonna go from fast to slow. So basically I'll be doing some speed work, into power work, into strength work, into accessories where you're gonna be working more hypertrophy based. And then you can throw in some conditioning that's based upon the main lifts or based upon what you're actually focusing on from an upper or lower. If you're hitting full body, then you can do a full body conditioning session. If you're hitting upper or lower, then that will dictate. But the goal is start very fast and then work your way to slow. That's the easiest way that I can put it. You got anything on that?
No, I mean, that's the general rule, right? You go power first, and then all the other stuff that's much slower, you go later. But I think it's what? Power, strength, endurance.
Yep. Yeah, pretty much. That's it. Super simple, guys. All right, with regards to recovery, can you ice bath too much, and what's too much? Okay. Boyd Allen, what you got on that one?
That's a good question. I think you can definitely ice bath too much. I think we had an athlete recently who had kind of a cardiac scare from ice bathing too much. I think it was just too much shock. But it seems like most studies point to ice bathing before being more beneficial and ice bathing after not being as, at least directly after not being as beneficial. As far as ice bathing too much, I mean, yeah, you can get hypothermia and you know, it can be dangerous.
True.
I'm not able to do more than 3 minutes.
Really?
No, it's tough.
Yeah, it does hurt. I'm not gonna lie, it does hurt. I mean, you also have to know, like, what is the adaptation that we're trying to get, right? If we're working to build hypertrophy, we don't want to hit the ice bath immediately after either, right? Because then you're not allowing the body to recover itself. Same thing with strength. I mean, the question here is that can you do it too much? And I think you can, especially if the goal is to like build muscle and build strength, right? Hitting the sauna can definitely help. I like to do cold showers, you know, at night or in the morning when I'm trying to wake up or go to sleep, where it can enhance all those neural demands, and also, you know, from an acetylcholine's perspective, a dopamine rush, all of that will help you either get, you know, cognitively aware and clarity, right, for your day, or it can calm your body down after and bring your core temperature to a degree of where it needs to be to go to sleep. You know?
Yeah, actually that's kind of how I do. I don't really focus too much on, how can it help my training? It's how can it help my recovery, my rest. So I'll come here in the mornings, I'll train, then I'll do sauna, then I'll do cold bath, right? It's kind of how Dr. Andrew Huberman talks about it, right? In the mornings cold, at night hot shower, it'll help you sleep, right? Because he was saying sleep is just based on a slight change in body temperature, right? And then that hot shower at night gets you ready for sleep. That cold shower, that cold shower or cold bath in the morning wakes you up, gets you going. It's just working your circadian rhythms, right? I think that's what it was. So that's how I like to approach it. I'm not really how can this help my training kind of person. I'm more how can I recover with this better, or how can I plan my day out.
It's interesting because you could think about maybe that has something to do with cortisol too as well. Your cortisol is highest in the morning, and you take a cold shower, that could bring down cortisol a slight bit. And when cortisol is low, maybe bringing up the core temperature, maybe bringing up cortisol just a slight bit. I don't know, it's something there. But for me, I like to do definitely cold showers in the morning, and then sauna throughout the day if I have time. You know me, I'm always working. So, but yeah, there it is. What else we got? Any other questions, guys?
I think there's one in that Q&A box now.
Where?
A little quick question mark, the red thing.
Oh man, we got a lot. Hold on. All right. What workouts and programs would you recommend for grappling, wrestling, tackling strength while fatigued, rugby specific? What workouts and programs would you recommend? I mean, primarily it's going to be something that is going to tax the musculature and do that over a time domain of what you're actually going through, whether it be for your sport with rugby, whether it be wrestling or so on and so forth. You can do, if I give you a particular protocol, I like to do with dumbbells even, if you don't have a whole lot to work with, you can do a dumbbell circuit or a grappler circuit where you can do a series of different movements, whether it be a push, pull, and a hinge and a squat, do that full body. So basically you're gonna do a squat or a front squat with dumbbells, roughly about 20% of your body weight. And then from there, you would do that for a set amount of reps. And then you go into a hinge variation, some sort of press or overhead press variation, some sort of row variation, and then do that for an extended amount of time, whether that be 5 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes. Continue on with that without dropping the dumbbells. So you're getting grip strength, you're hitting your entire body, and you're getting a conditioning component with that too as well. It's very simple to do. You can do that anywhere. If you have a set of dumbbells, make sure that you have the amount of weight that you need to allow you to still get technically good reps, but also challenge the body, challenge the nervous system, challenge the muscular system. And that could be done 1 to 2 times per week. Very limited with your stuff, you can still do that. You can do it with a kettlebell too as well. Kettlebell swings, in my opinion, are, I think from my perspective, especially in rugby, they're highly underutilized. I think you should be utilizing kettlebells, mace swinging, even like the Bulgarian bags, things like that, that's gonna allow you to relax and contract rapidly is very important for any athlete and just in general. So same thing with kettlebells. You can do a kettlebell swing, a kettlebell snatch, a kettlebell clean and pull. You know, we do coil presses, things like that. Still do it in that same time frame with that extended amount of time. The goal really is to accumulate lactate and allow your body to buffer it out accordingly by stimulating it over and over again. Just make sure that you're recovering well with supplementation and the proper means to do so. So, you got anything on that one?
No, spot on.
Cool. All right, where do you place the oxygen sensor? What muscles and why? I'm thinking you're meaning is he talking about the Moxie?
I guess Moxie.
The Moxie is going to be placed, and you're talking about the NIRS device that we use for rate limiting factors, which is something that we like to utilize to actually measure blood flow trends in real time. We do that on the assault bike. We do it, where we do it on the, not the skier, but what else?
We tried doing it
on the watt bike.
We did it on the watt bike.
Watt bike, yeah.
We've tried doing it, hitting the back, but the shoulder sensor didn't stay.
Yeah. Ideally, we would like to do it in real time with the specific stimulus that is conducive to the sport, like grappling, wrestling, stuff like that. But we just got to find the details on like how to place the sensors and keep them on our body. Yep. I think this one that we have with the Nox is definitely going to change the game. It's different with active NO is because, listen, no matter what, from a limiter perspective, if you don't have active nitric oxide and you don't have vasodilation, you're not going to get blood flow, right? And that blood flow is not going to help you increase oxygen, and you can't utilize oxygen or deliver it. So It's going to go hand in hand, and the good thing about the knocks, from what I understand, and this is developed by our guy Evan Pycon. If you haven't done so, check him out. But Evan developed this thing so that we can use NIRS inside of knocks. So now we get a NIRS, or I always can't say that shit. Near infraspectroscopy, right? Component, right? And bro, I'm a meathead, bro. Not, whatever. But we can still see active NO too as well. So yeah, so to answer your question, we put the Moxy on the vastus lateralis and the medial delt and the intercostals, right? There you go. What else we got? Let's bang these out real quick. For example, 3 minutes in the morning and, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, cool, I like it. Okay, got all these. All right, last question. What program are the SWAT officers using? So if you guys been following me on my Instagram, you've been seeing me work with SWAT and police officers in the new gym here at Deerfield Beach. Now, one thing, quick announcement. If you are in the area in South Florida, make sure you come check out the Daru Strong Performance Center, HQ in Deerfield Beach, Florida. It's my hometown. This is where we're at right now, so make sure you check it out. If you are in the area, come train with us and over there too as well. So with SWAT guys, we are running condensed conjugates. So I'm doing a similar system and protocol that I would use for my MMA fighters because they have to be ready at all times. So we're gonna be working through sub-maximal efforts and maximal efforts along with some power movements and things of that nature and conditioning that is around what they're gonna have to go through on the field or in their actual work. So we also work on a lot of mobility because these guys are very, I'm gonna say it, they're broken down in a lot of ways, from carrying their gear to just long nights, being on call all the time. So bringing cortisol down is very important. So the nutrition, the supplementation, the recovery methods, and the overall mobility training and movement quality that can enhance their ability to do their job is very important. So we do put a large emphasis on mobility and gaining range of motion and functionality with particular movements that are conducive for them subjectively. Now, from a basic standpoint, we are doing condensed conjugate though, right? So me and Jose both work with them, and we like to train them like athletes because they are. So as a tactical athlete, they have to be ready at all times, doing some form of strength training with base, fundamental movement patterns, a squat, a hinge, a push, a pull, and we're also working on gait, and we're working on their ability to rotate and move in planes of motion, in all planes of motion primarily. So yeah, that's pretty much a rundown of it. You got anything to add?
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. We just, like you said, the condensed conjugate method, and then just address a couple of mixed energy systems training here, and kind of get away from this whole, and I know the military still does it, these long distance runs. They're great for clearing your head or whatever, maybe working your heart, but it's not really relative to the job. In that position, if you're running 3 miles to get somewhere, someone's gonna die. There's no way around it,
That's a good.
We have cars, we have helicopters.
True.
So they gotta be able to be explosive and move under fire, right? And be strong. And very similar to our fighters, a lot of these guys have huge posterior chain deficiencies. It's the biggest thing that, if you guys are familiar with Matt Wenning, he did pretty good work with the Ranger Regiment in the U.S. Army, and it's nothing different than a lot of posterior work, posterior chain work.
Yeah, we put huge emphasis on that. Obviously, you guys have been following me. I have a West Side type of style background, whatever you want to call it. Shout out to Matt Wenning. Maybe get him on the podcast too as well pretty soon, but he hit it spot on. It was a good add-on with that. We don't do a whole lot of long distance running or anything of that nature because their body's beat up, their joints are beat up anyways. So if we're ever going to do something, it's going to be more short in duration, but we're still going to get a stimulus of both delivery and utilization of oxygen. So that's what we do in a nutshell. All right, next question. This is the last one. I promise the last one here. All right, a fighter has 20 pounds to lose 2 weeks before the fight. How would you go about that for the fighter to make weight? Here we go. We're going to finish it off with Jose.
Let's assume this guy doesn't have to lose 20 pounds of fat. right? Let's say this athlete is not fat. So 10 days before weigh-ins, you're going to start water loading, right? There's a formula for it, but roughly just about anybody is going to be just around 2 gallons of water a day, or roughly 7 to 8 liters of water a day. So we start that water loading every day all the way until pretty much the day before weigh-ins. 3 days before the weigh-in itself, we're going to cut sodium, so any added salt into your food. There's still going to be some naturally occurring salt in the food, which is fine, but just don't add any more salt. The purpose of the water load is to help us with our water manipulation, right? If we drink 2 gallons of water a day, that's 16 pounds of water we're putting inside of our body. So he has to lose 20 pounds. And again, let's assume he's not fat. That water loading is going to help him release more water, so he's getting used to going to the bathroom more, right? And getting rid of water that way. Then once we start to cut sodium, then the water retention starts to drop a little bit, so he releases even more water. Once we remove that water the day before, typically noon the day before, he'll have, obviously he's going to drop some water through sweating, through sleeping, through talking, just evaporation. And then if you do a soft cut the night before, which is fine too, and then cut in the morning the rest of the weight. But the biggest thing is, one, let's make sure he's not 20 pounds overweight and fat. Because if that's the case 2 weeks out and he's got to lose that weight from fat, it's not going to happen, right? That should have been addressed way earlier on. But the biggest thing you have to worry about is water loading those 10 days before, cutting the sodium, right, 3 days prior to weigh-ins, and then the weight cut itself. If everything's done correctly, they should lose that water pretty quickly. I've had horrible weight cuts where people don't water load. They'll cut sodium and carbs way too early. For weight cuts, you shouldn't really be cutting carbohydrates because you need them for recovery. And you're still going to train fight week, right? You're still going to do your shakeouts, your pads and everything. So if you don't have the energy, you're probably going to get injured. But the biggest thing is water loading, and that's sodium cut the 3 days before, and then just cut weight as usual. But 20 pounds is pretty normal. If you water load 2 weeks out, right? Like Tyler's a great example. When I worked with Tyler, we would get him to 170 pounds, right? And he walks around 210 most of the time. 10 days out, he was about 192 pounds, right? So we did the water loading, everything. Fight week, he's still like around like the high 180s. Okay, maybe 190. So we cut sodium, and then we cut water noon the day before. He'll do a soft cut, which is just the bike, maybe hit the sauna a little bit the night before. And then on weigh-in day, we'll cut weight in the morning, but we'll only cut about 8 pounds, if that, because he cut some of it during a soft cut, peed most of it out, and then he floated weight at night. So as we sleep, we still breathe, right? And we lose water through breathing. It's just gas exchange. So he's going to float some weight. But you see a pretty big drop between cutting sodium and that soft cut. And then the actual weight you have to cut for the hard weight cut, it's typically, ideally, below 10 pounds. I mean, if you're like a Yoel Romero, that's completely different. Eric had some horror stories with that, right? The guy literally almost died in front of him.
Shout out to Eric Pena, by the way.
Yeah.
All right, there it is, guys. So we're gonna go ahead and end it. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your questions here on IG. Make sure you follow Jose Darth_Flex on Instagram. You guys check him out. If you haven't done so, if you have any more questions, DM him. Also, make sure you follow him if you're actually watching the podcast on the YouTube channel. Make sure you go to the YouTube channel and subscribe. Go to the YouTube podcast page on Instagram and also give it a follow so you know when the new episodes come out. Thank you again. Thank you again. Thank you again. See you again next time. Peace.